Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Vern, for the invitation. Crew management is often the most important aspect of managing a farm. It's also the most neglected part of managing a farm. I think that's because it's uncomfortable. People don't like conflict. And so I hope to share with you a little bit about how we address that through some of the different ways which we manage our employees. Vern, do you have the slideshow coming up? Okay, so I just want to start out with a really brief orientation of our farm. So I farm in northwestern Massachusetts. I can see Vermont and New York from our farm here. I started here 17 years ago, and previous to that, for 7 years, I was the agriculture director for an organization called the Food Project just outside of Boston. We're a small, sustainable farm. We are exclusively a pickup CSA. We don't package anything. We don't box anything. We don't bring it there. Everyone has to come to the farm to pick up their produce. It's a free choice CSA. We have a large U-pick component to it. We have a number of covered structures on our farm. We've got a bunch of animals. We have a homestead bakery. Regarding employment, it's myself, my wife, who works about 15 hours primarily during the CSA time in the summer. My 18-year-old daughter works from 6:30 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon every day in the summer. My son bounces all over the place, helping here and there. We have a winter CSA manager who was an employee here. She was an apprentice for 2 years. Then she co-ran the farm with me for a year while I was on a sabbatical with my family in South America. Then she ran her own farm for 5 years, and then she's been back here for 3 years. And she only works 3 days a week because she has a small child. We have 3 full season apprentices, and then we have an independent contractor who's a baker. In addition to them, we also have 500 adult farm members that work 2 hours at some point of the season, and sometimes they work as many as 10 hours. And we have at least one volunteer group come every week, and they work, it's between 2 and 40 people who come every week. So there's a lot of people bouncing around the farm to manage. Next slide. There we go. So I wanted to wake people up with this slide. It's a quote that I came across about a month ago. If you're constantly firing people or they're resigning on bad terms, it's a sign that you're either bad at hiring, you're bad at managing people, you're bad at tolerating dissent, or all of the above. How many people do you have to fire or resign before you realize that the common denominator in all of these failing hires is you, or it's me, or it's us? I really appreciated what Lisa said in the intro related to that an intention for the season is thinking about what is the most loving response.
Don't be so passive.
What is the most loving response to a situation? And I think if we broaden that out and think about not just a loving response to a situation, but how do we involve a loving response or a caring or a respectful response in all of the different management systems on our farm, then that would lead us to a different outcome with our employees. So what I want to do is move through some of the different systems that we have on our farm to manage people, and maybe for you to think about what kind of intentions you want to make this season regarding one of these areas. So hiring for fit. Hiring for us is the most important thing we do on the farm over the course of the season. How clear are we on our marketing materials? How much are we looking for people that really embody the mission of our farm? And what is our success rate in trying to do that? How do we improve that? As far as orientation, how do we unload people to our farm? What kind of job descriptions do we have? How clear are the expectations? For me, what I've realized over a couple of decades is that people don't like surprises. They don't like good surprises during the course of the season. They don't like bad surprises over the course of the season, whether it's additional hours of work, additional jobs that they need to do. So how can we be extremely clear from the get-go, from our interview process, from when we're orienting people about exactly what we hope out of the course of the season? What kind of infrastructure do we have which can lead to success for the people that are on our farm? That could be housing. It could be kitchen areas. It could be what kind of tools do we have which lead to their success? ear protection, eye protection, first aid kits. What organizational structure and roles do we have? Do we have a hierarchy? What kind of hierarchy do we have? Is it a vertical or horizontal hierarchy? What kind of employment contracts do we have? Do we have standard operating procedures? How do people understand what their role on the farm is so they know who to talk to when they need to? What kind of benefits do we provide? Not just monetary benefits, but food and treats, time, experiences. All of those things are important at different points of the season. And it's kind of our job to figure out when to utilize them for their greatest benefit. What kind of rules do we have on the farm? Initially, when I started managing, I didn't have a lot of rules, and then it's really hard to build them halfway through the season. So now we have a number of rules that we start out with. We're very clear when we're interviewing people about those rules or when they're starting with us. And then we can let off of those if we want to and if it seems appropriate. But oftentimes trying to layer on rules in the middle of the season lead to a lot of challenging conflict. What kind of weekly and management structures do we have on our farm which allow people to understand what they need to do every day? What kind of weekly task lists do we provide people so that they have a scope of what's really happening on the farm for that week? And daily, how are we providing information to everyone who works with us so that they know exactly what they need to do? How are we supporting the professional development on the farm for our employees? So people that work on our farms aren't just there to serve our needs. They are developing themselves professionally, and I found they really appreciate it when we're kind of walking that path with them. We're checking in with them. What are the skills that they want to develop to either improve their role while they're on our farms or be able to run their own farm someday? And how do we express care and gratitude? How do we provide instruction? That can be through daily meetings with people. It can be through monthly feedback sessions. We do an exit interview the last day that everyone works here. And in that exit interview, we're reviewing with everyone the various systems that we have on our farm and how we can improve on them. And one of the things that we constantly hear year in and year out is a foundational experience for them through the course of the season are our monthly feedback sessions. That's when they get the most input on how to do their job better and how to improve. And so for the rest of the time that I have, what I want to do is focus specifically on monthly check-ins, because oftentimes people hear about a farm having, they check in every month, but exactly what does that mean? So I kind of want to go deep into that. So why do we do check-ins? Well, the primary reason is because we want to proactively address areas of conflict before they get too big. The reality is that on any farm, it's physically, mentally, emotionally challenging. There is going to be conflict. Young farmers, when they're starting to manage people, oftentimes get shaken by the fact that there is conflict during the course of the season. The reality is it's always going to be there. It's the nature of the job. And so what we're trying to do is address it in a proactive way when conflict is small, when we can easily address it rather than letting it get really big and out of hand. And when it's oftentimes big and out of hand, it has nothing to do with what started it all. Employees are open to receiving feedback in a safe environment, and I'm going to talk a little later about how we try to create that safe environment. It also forces the employer to look at the complete body of work and not just focus on what people need to work on. Oftentimes, 80% of what they're doing is fantastic, it's awesome, and we want to encourage that, and 20% is something they need to work on. But the data...
You have about 5 minutes if you want to leave time for questions.
Perfect. That 80% of the feedback that people get is what they're doing wrong and how they need to improve. It's an instant morale boost to everyone because they feel cared for and respected and listened to. And it's hard to express how important that is and what kind of rollover that effects that has on our efficiency. And coming from that, I would definitely say that the most efficient use of my time over the course of the season is through my monthly check-ins. So what is our schedule? Well, people start in April on our farm. And so at the start of May, I give feedback to our team collectively. I'm letting them know what's going well and what are areas of improvement. It's also a time for me to hear from them 2 to 4 specific goals that they have over the course of the season. At the start of June, I meet with each individual employee I let them know what they're doing well and what are areas of improvement. In July, we do something called intensive real talk. It's a form of 360-degree feedback, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. In August, it's a time for them to give self-reflective feedback. So they're letting me know what they think they're doing well and what are areas of improvement. Oftentimes they're much harder on themselves than I am. And it's just a different lens, a different way in which we can get into this conversation about how they're doing on our farm. At that point, we also review the goal setting that we did in May, and we put things into categories of, is this a goal that you already met? And so we don't need to worry about it. Is it a goal that's not important anymore? And we don't need to worry about it. But if it's a goal that you still want to reach, then we have time at the end of October to discuss. We sit around a table for an hour or two and can discuss different topics. We also have a lending library that we can direct people to. We can go on some farm visits. Can you go to that last slide quickly? There we go. In September, it's again, me to each individual employee. And then in October, we do, again, intensive real talk, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so intensive real talk is when I worked at the food project that I learned this type of feedback.
Recording in progress.
And this was adapted from a book called Growing Together by Greg Allen. It's practiced at the food project. And so I'm going to quickly explain it to you. So a week before we're going to have real talk, I explain the process and review the ground rules. I give the employees an hour of work time to write feedback for each member of the crew. I ask them to write 2 to 4 positives and 2 to 4 areas of improvement, all within the context of how can we do our work better to fulfill the mission. There's a book called Radical Candor, which was suggested by the listserv, the Vermont listserv. And a question that I got from that book is what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? I've used that a couple of times. I feel like that's a very easy lead-in for people to give me feedback. The format of intensive real talk is everyone meets one-on-one with each other. One person shares for 3.5 minutes. Then I yell switch, and then the other person shares for 3.5 minutes. It's not a dialogue. It's an opportunity just to listen to feedback. And then after you meet with one person, then you meet with the next and the next and the next. And then at the end of it, I facilitate a discussion about how it all went for everyone. As far as sharing real talk, these are part of the ground rules. Be kind, call it as you see it, speak the details. So talk about what was the situation, what was the behavior, and then what was the impact. Instead of saying you didn't do well working with a volunteer group, you can say last Friday when you were working with the volunteer group, I saw that initially you did a great intro to everyone, but then once the work started, you seemed to be in the front and you worked great, but the rest of the group kind of fell apart. And so the work at the end of the day, we really didn't achieve our objective. So what I need to do is remain bouncing between everyone, ideally to remain in the middle of the crew so you can see what everyone's doing. We want to balance the scales, tell people what they did well and areas of improvement. Pick and choose. You only have 3.5 minutes, so you can't go down some weird tangent because you don't want to talk directly to people. And read the listener. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. So receiving real talk. So open up. Notice if you begin shutting down. Try not to be defensive. Look up. Make eye contact. You want to listen up. People are going to say a lot of things, and so it's important that you recall those. And we got a couple more on that. I can store it up. And I think one important thing about receiving feedback is to suppress that inner voice that wants to constantly respond of, oh, but you don't understand, but I got to give you my side. When you're receiving feedback, it's an opportunity simply to receive the information that another person has, and then you decide how you want to utilize that. Can you go to the next slide? So people often ask, oh, wow, this sounds like it takes a ton of time to give people feedback monthly. In May, June, and September, when I'm giving feedback to people, it takes me about an hour to prep, and then collectively it takes me about an hour to give that feedback to everyone. In August, when it's self-reflective, it doesn't take me any time to prep, and it takes me about an hour and a half to meet with everyone. In July and October, each of those takes about 3 hours. So it's 30 minutes to explain how we do it. It's an hour of work time that I give everyone to write everything down. And then on the day of, it's about an hour and a half in which we're meeting with one another, and then I facilitate a discussion. So over the course of the season, it's less than 2 hours a month. And when I think about the increased morale, the ability for all of us to work with one another in a much more heightened way, it's time very well spent. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so finally, I just want to say, I want to mention a couple resources. Growing Together by Greg Gale that I already talked about. The Slayed Edge is a great book by Jeff Olson. Radical Candor is a fantastic book, and it's also a podcast that I would encourage a lot of you to check out. Atomic Habits by James Clear, some of you are probably familiar with. And then there's all kinds of podcasts that are out there which overlap management, personal development, that are incredibly helpful. We don't have a lot of time now for questions. We have time for a couple of questions, but I do want to say that in addition to our farm, which I've probably done this kind of feedback over 100 times, I've also facilitated either in person or online, and I'm happy to do that if people want to go further to discuss this kind of stuff. So thank you very much, and again, I am open to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Don. Apologize for some technical issues.
Okay.
Becky, if you see any questions in the chat, you could ask them.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That was awesome. I don't see any questions right now. Hans Estrin made a note that he's in the process of planning some online grower groups cohort sessions in the spring of 22 to support the VVBGA growers to set up for hiring and managing employees. So get in touch with Hans if you would like to participate in that. And Gregory is asking, what is your employee policy on phones? I assume cell phones.
Yeah. Great question. Since I have a second, I will quickly talk about my rules. No illegal drugs or smoking on the farm. Alcohol is okay in moderation after work. No pets on the farm. This year, everyone needs to be vaccinated. No technology during the workday. So people can't have anything in their ears. They can't be talking on their phones during the workday. If they have a specific appointment that they need to, a doctor's appointment that they need to make or respond to, then, if they mention it at the start of the day, they can definitely have that on them. But for the most part, we ask people not to be plugged in. And this is one of those rules that if we start there at the start of the year, later in the season, if it makes sense, like this past year, I turned on, remote speaker, we're washing vegetables in the fall and listening to a lot of fun music and dancing and singing, and it was awesome. But if we start out that way, it gets out of hand. I've been there. We have a couple other rules, but those are ones that I'll quickly mention.
Great. Thanks again, Don. And a reminder, all the slides will be posted after this meeting, so you can go back and get Don's excellent information.